Stanley.
Pooh, Mickey, Pooh, Pooh.
Stanley. An elephant never forgets. An elephant never forgets. Boom, boom. The floor in Stanley's room trembled. "I say," his goldfish Dennis said. "Hey, what's the big deal?" asked Elsie, Stanley's cat. "Who's making the racket?" "The biggest animal in the land," said Stanley, dressed in a big gray blanket. "Elephant?" cried his dog Harry. "Dudes, run!" "Silly Harry," said Stanley, taking a springy toy off his nose. "It's me, Stanley." "I knew it was Stanley," Dennis said with a sigh of relief. Then Dennis reminded Stanley that he had promised to go to the supermarket with his mom. "Don't worry, Dennis. I've got plenty of time," said Stanley, heading to the kitchen. "I've got enough time to drink a big glass of orange juice." But there was just one problem. Stanley's big brother, Lionel, had finished the juice down to the very last drop. Just then, Stanley's mom called out that it was time to go to the store. And a good thing, too, thought Stanley. They needed more juice, now. "Don't leave without me, Mom," he yelled as he ran to his room. "I'll be right back." Stanley got dressed. Then he put on one sneaker and tied it. But when he reached for his other sneaker, it wasn't there. "What's the matter, Stanley?" Dennis asked. "I've forgotten where I put my sneaker," Stanley cried. "If you were a sneaker, where would you be?" Stanley said as he looked all around his room. He asked Elsie and Harry if they had seen his sneaker, but they... Then Stanley remembered an old saying about elephants. An elephant never forgets. The saying must have come from somewhere, and there was one sure place to find out. Quickly, Stanley pulled out the great big book of everything and turned the pages. A, B, C, D, E, elephants. "Look," said Stanley, "these pictures show two different kinds of elephants." "They both look pretty big," said Stanley. "Should we see how big one really is?" suggested Dennis. "Let's go," said Stanley, picking up Dennis's fishbowl. And together they jumped into the great big book of everything. Stanley and Dennis found themselves standing in front of an elephant in a hot African valley. Dennis told Stanley that an elephant could grow up to 13 feet tall as 4 Stanleys. And elephants could weigh as much as 6 tons, or 12,000 pounds. To find a heavier animal on Earth, Dennis said, you'd have to go underwater and find a blue whale. Next, Dennis pointed out that elephants use their trunks to suck up water and then spray it into their mouths. They eat bushes and plants and trees, said Dennis, and lots of the time they knock trees over so the herd can eat together. Now all that's left to figure out is if the saying is true, said Stanley. Do elephants ever forget? Dennis then explained that the saying comes from the way mother elephants remember how to lead the younger elephants to a good place for food and water when the seasons change. Every year they retrace their steps, said Dennis. It's called migration. That's it, said Stanley. I'll retrace my steps to the last time I remember wearing my sneaker. So Stanley and Dennis jumped back into the great big book of everything and into Stanley's room. Stanley thought for a moment, then ran to his closet. I found it, he shouted. My sneaker. With both sneakers on, Stanley hurried downstairs to meet his mom. But it seemed she had forgotten where she had left something. Her keys. Try to remember the last time you had them, Stanley suggested. and retrace your steps. Let me think, Stanley's mom said. Yesterday I wore my red coat. Then she went into the closet, reached into the pocket of her red coat, and pulled out her keys. Stanley, how did you get to be such a smart boy? She said. Stanley smiled. That night, after a trip to the supermarket and a big glass of orange juice with dinner, Stanley and Dennis talked about all the wonderful things they had learned about elephants. One thing I'll never forget, Stanley said with a big yawn, is how to fall asleep. Good night, Dennis. Good night, elephant boy Stanley, Dennis said with a smile. The end. His dad whispered. Again? Said his mom. That's it, honey, she said to Stanley. You've just got to go to bed early tonight. I don't see what's the big deal about sleeping, Stanley said, as he climbed into bed with his dog Harry and his cat Elsie. All Stanley wanted to do at bedtime was play, and that made him very sleepy during the day. Everyone needs sleep, Stanley, said his goldfish Dennis. Then he yawned. Sweet dreams, Stanley. See you in the morning. But just as Stanley reached over to turn out the light, he spied one of his favorite stuffed bears lying on the floor. Hey, that bear belongs with the rest of his family, Stanley said, jumping out of bed. He took the little bear over to a great big box of bears. I forgot I had so many, he said, excited, and now wide awake. Before long, no one in Stanley's room was getting any sleep. Growl! Stanley moved the bears noisily around his room. This one's the mother, he said, and the others are her cubs. Cubs are what you call baby bears. The mother is searching for berries, and you know some bears are really good at fishing. Finally, Dennis couldn't take it anymore. All right, Stanley, he said. There's just one thing you've left out. The most important bear fact of all. Something I don't know? Tell me. What? Stanley exclaimed. Okay, Stanley, said Dennis. Take out the great big book of everything. So Stanley did. Quickly, Stanley turned the pages and said, A, B, bears. And sure enough, there was a big picture of a grizzly bear. Then, all of a sudden, the bear in the book began to move and grow, and grow, and grow, and grow, until it popped out of the book and into Stanley's bedroom. Wow, this is so cool, said Stanley. My own bear. It's a grizzly bear, said Dennis. Dennis told Stanley that there are 7 different kinds of bears in the world. The polar bear, the sun bear, the Asiatic black bear, the sloth bear, the spectacled bear, the American black bear, and the brown bear, which is also the grizzly bear. The smallest one is only 3 feet long. That's just a little smaller than you are, continued Dennis. But the largest one stands nearly 12 feet tall. Stanley wasn't sure how big the grizzly bear in his room was, but it was more than big enough to fill up his bed. We ought to return him to the great big book of everything and go to sleep, said Dennis. But when Stanley tried to wake him, the bear just kept right on sleeping. This grizzly bear seems a little sleepy, said Stanley. That's exactly what I wanted to tell you, Dennis said. The important fact you forgot was that grizzly bears need to hibernate. What? Stanley asked. Hibernate, said Dennis. Dennis went on to explain how bears like grizzlies save energy by sleeping in their caves all the way through the winter months when food is hard to find. So while you're out playing in the snow and doing fun winter things, Dennis said, grizzly bears just sleep. Oh, I get it, said Stanley. What a great idea. And it's exactly what you should be doing, Dennis said. Not all winter, just all night. Stanley nodded and said, maybe then I won't fall asleep in school anymore. Exactly, Dennis said with a smile. But before they could go to sleep, they had to send the grizzly back into the great big book of everything. Stanley placed the book under the bear, and back he went. Good night, Mr. Grizzly Bear, said Stanley. You know, Dennis, Stanley said as he once again snuggled into bed with Harry and Elsie, bears are pretty amazing, but I think I'd rather share my room with you guys. Dennis yawned one more big yawn. Good night, little grizzly bear, Stanley. The end. Barely awake.